What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the Gray Area with your host, It's That Kid Greg. Now in this video I wanted to discuss the topic of marriage, and we're in for a long one, so buckle up. So what is marriage? Google defines marriage as the union between a man and a woman, or two people of the same sex in certain jurisdictions, that is legally recognized. Now there's nothing wrong with this definition per se, but it seems pretty modern. So let's travel back in time a bit and see if we can't deconstruct this. Now the origins of marriage are very unclear. They span several civilizations and generations, and it's pretty much something that popped up all over the world, almost entirely independently of one another, and yet all these cultures came to the same conclusions. Now because of all these differences in cultures and customs, there's a lot of differences in what constitutes a marriage looking from place to place across history. However, in 1955, a man by the name of Edmund Leach composed a list of 10 rights that seem to go along with marriage no matter where they go, in his article called Man. Now these 10 rights that he came up with serve as a sort of guideline to what constitutes a marriage. And the reason why he picked these 10, and the reason why I picked his list for this video, is because they seem to be the most accurate over as broad a spectrum as possible. So here we go. 1. To establish a legal father for a woman's children. 2. To establish a legal mother for a father's children. 3. To give a husband a monopoly on the wife's sexuality. 4. To give a wife a monopoly over the husband's sexuality. 5. To give the husband partial or monopolistic control over the wife's domestic and labor services. 6. To give the wife partial or monopolistic control over the husband's domestic and labor services. 7. To give the husband partial or total control over the woman's resources and accruing potential. 8. To give the wife partial or total control over the husband's resources or accruing potential. 9. To establish a joint fund of resources, wealth, etc. to benefit the children of the marriage. And 10. To establish a affinity that is socially recognizable between the wife's husband and her brothers. For this one, we're gonna leave it to the side for a little bit, because what it basically sums up to is just an alliance between families, which is kind of obvious. Now we're gonna go through this list in pairs because most of them, as you might have noticed, are the same point, simply flipped to match the role of husband or wife. So 1 and 2 focus on making sure that children have two parents in their lives. I find it interesting that Leach decided to use the words legally and not biologically, which shows that even in his mind in the 50s, he was thinking about the possibilities of stepchildren or perhaps adoption, which is both viable ways to raise a child. But he did emphasize that having two parents seemed to be something that marriage strives for. 3 and 4 focus on sexuality. That is to say, both the man and the woman have monopolies on each other's sexual activities. Now I find this one interesting because nowadays a lot of people would see this as, oh no, you can't hold somebody's sexuality hostage. That's not fair, that's not right. But let's think about this for a second practically. The first point focused much on the well-being of the children. Well, if somebody is out having sexual escapades outside of their marriage, that could, 1, lead to infections, STDs, STIs, whatever you'd like to call them, that could harm the mother when you come back. And that could end up making one or both parents lose their lives, which is a bad thing for the kids. And then second, what if since this is going out through history, we didn't necessarily have birth control and stuff for a very long time. So illegitimate children were also a big issue back then. And if a child was born illegitimately, especially to somebody who was already married, well, where do they go? Who raises them? Who's their parents? What if the person that you cheated with wasn't married? Are they going to take care of the child? Are you going to take care of the child? It leaves that child in a gray area that they didn't need to be in, because they didn't need to be born, because children do best to parent. Basically, the monopoly on sex is a failsafe to keep the system airtight, to make sure that there are no loose ends or slippery slopes to go down. 5 and 6 seems to be a hot button issue nowadays, with people on both sides saying, no, nobody should have the rights to somebody else's labor. And on women's half of this, they're saying, oh, we shouldn't have to be housewives. We shouldn't have to sit around at home and take care of the kids and clean the dishes and make the food. We're bigger than that. We're better than that. We have more opportunities now. And men are now saying things like, oh, well, we shouldn't have to work 9 to 5 all day, every week, all the time to provide for you. We shouldn't have to do that. It's basically slave labor. We're hearing this from both sides. But again, it's an issue of practicality. Let's look at the facts here. A long time ago, before we had, all this social change and we're fighting for equality, it was generally accepted that women were not suited to go out into the workforce because most of the jobs were performing hard labor. And so men also, who were more suited to these jobs, recognized that, hey, we're not as good as taking care of small children, because on the off chance that we can't scrounge up food for them, we can't just produce it from our chests. So women stayed home with the kids and men went outside to work. And that generally worked out for most of history. That's why our gender roles evolved the way they did throughout time, because men saw that they were good at something that the women weren't, and the women saw that they were good at something that the men weren't. And again, this all relates back to the benefit of the children, the babies. Think of the children! So points 7 and 8 say that the husband and the wife should be sharing their resources, should be sharing the money that they have, the money that they're making, their property, etc. And point 9 brings this together by saying that joining these things, joining the husband and the wife's property and wealth, is all for the benefit of, again, the children. It all is for the child. This partnership should be here for the child. And I pick out these points because I find it interesting that Leach recognized something in marriage that isn't really talked about anymore, and that is that marriage generally exists not for the benefit of the man, not for the benefit of the woman, but for the benefit of the children, the next generation. Marriage is mainly there to provide a stable upbringing for the next generation, and we can pass that upbringing on. It's a legal contract. It's both a legal and, in a lot of cases, religious, spiritual contract that says, hey, we're gonna put these two people together, and even if they might fight and bicker sometimes, they will stay together for the benefit of the babies that they may produce or that they may pick up and take care of. And another thing I find interesting is that there's no mention of love throughout this. Because we know throughout most of history, love was not a factor when it came to marriage. Hell, even in the Bible, the most famous couple of all time when it comes to biblical reading, Adam and Eve, they were never said to be in love. God put them together and said, hey, you two got each other. I need you to be fruitful and multiply. Yeah. Again, the benefit of the children rather than the individuals. But that's history. Nowadays, marriage is not so much about the little ones. ones and it's more about the big ones. Some could argue that marriage in more recent history has become somewhat meaningless, and in the worst case, downright nefarious, at least to some people. For starters, marriage has always teetered on that fine line between church and state. And in more recent history, we've seen marriage lean more and more and more and more and more to the state side of things, as opposed to staying on that fine line where it is neither purely a religious institute and neither purely a legal institute. We hear a lot about the sanctity of marriage when it comes to people mainly on the religious right, but we always hear this in the context of like gay marriage and what if a man marries his dog. But we never hear it in terms of things like divorce, which is hugely frowned upon in most historical cases of marriage. Ideally, marriage is a bond that's supposed to last for life, or at the very least until you know for certain that the children that you've raised are secure in life and no longer need you and your spouse to constantly be watching over them and making sure that they're not messing up. It was very rare for married people to separate in the past, and most of the time there had to be a very legitimate reason, like chronic abuse, sexual abuse, somebody dies. There had to be something serious to cause these two people to split up. And with the advent of things like no-fault divorce, spouses need pretty much no reason to split up. It can be something as trivial as we're just not compatible anymore, which back in the day would have been considered blasphemy socially, legally, religiously. And I guess nowadays things are different with things like joint custody, where the kid can see both their parents still. But we know that divorce does have an effect on children. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of the times, joint custody is not a thing because, generally speaking, courts and people still favor the mother to have full custody of the child as opposed to the father having custody at all. In fact, only 1 in 6 fathers actually win custody battles when it comes to divorce court. And even if the father wins and gets full custody of his kid, it's still not a balanced environment or lifestyle for the child. And speaking of custody, what of child support and alimony? This is what I was referring to when I talked about nefarious. A father can lose complete custody of his child, being unable to see him and take care of him, and yet still have to pay and support that child financially until he is old enough to financially take care of himself. So 18 usually is the age where they say, alright, lay off. And alimony, in a sense, is even worse, where the man has to financially support a woman that he's no longer with simply because they were together. It seems kind of unfair, don't you think? And on that alimony note, it actually doesn't make much sense anymore. See, in the past, the reason for alimony was that since women were not allowed to go out and work, it was irresponsible for a woman who is separated from her husband to be left to fend for herself because she had no means of actually generating revenue, generating wealth to take care of herself and potentially the child. So obviously, okay, well, you guys aren't together anymore, but the least you could do is give her a little bit of what you're making so that she can survive, at least until she gets back on her feet. But nowadays, women are allowed to work. Women are empowered to work. And so it makes little to no sense why we still have these ridiculous cases where the man has to continue paying out of his pocket to support this woman, where she can just as easily go out and get a job for herself. And honestly, it feels like extortion in a sense. And it breaks down to the self-centered nature of people today. And I want to talk about the positives and negatives of marriage as a whole, but I'm going to save that for a later video. So this will be part 1 to a 2-part video. First time I'm doing that on this channel. So for now, what I do want to say is it seems like marriage has little or nothing to do with love. At least historically it hasn't. And it seems more like marriage has always been something for the benefit of the children rather than the individuals taking part in the union. And I will give my opinion on that at the end of the next video. But what do you guys think so far? Let me know in the comment section below. I'd like to thank you for watching, and as always, nothing is black and white.